This is the story of Maya, a 12-year-old homeless girl who carries the weight of losing her mother 7 years ago, and Thomas Crow Feather, a 45-year-old Apache man who has spent decades running from his own devastating loss. Their chance encounter on a frozen December night in Phoenix will shatter both their carefully built walls and reveal that sometimes the most broken people are exactly who we need to heal. What starts as a simple act of kindness will uncover buried secrets, challenge everything they believe about family, and lead to a revelation that will change both their lives forever. But the truth Maya whispers that night will test whether love can truly conquer the deepest wounds, or if some scars are meant to last forever. The cardboard beneath Maya's small body had turned soggy from the December rain seeping through the alley pavement, but she didn't move. Moving meant acknowledging the cold, and acknowledging the cold meant remembering that she was alone again, just like every night for the past 3 months since aging out of her last foster placement. Her fingers traced the worn edges of a photograph tucked inside her jacket pocket, a ritual she performed whenever the memories threatened to surface. And tonight, they were clawing at her consciousness like desperate ghosts demanding attention. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed off the narrow alley walls, and Maya's body tensed instinctively. She had learned that footsteps after midnight rarely brought good news for a homeless 12-year-old girl. The steps slowed, then stopped completely just a few feet from where she huddled behind a dumpster, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. What happened next would forever change the trajectory of both their lives, though neither could have predicted it in that moment. "Hey there, little one." The voice was deep, weathered, and carried an unexpected gentleness that made Maya's head snap up despite her better judgment. Standing before her was a tall man with long black hair streaked with silver, his face marked by lines that spoke of both hardship and wisdom. His clothes were clean but worn, and his dark eyes held a pain so familiar that Maya recognized it immediately as a mirror of her own. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Maya's first instinct was to run, as she had learned to do whenever adults took notice of her. But something about this man's presence felt different. There was no threat in his posture, no false brightness in his voice that adults used when they were about to call social services or lecture her about the dangers of street life. Instead, there was something that looked dangerously close to understanding, and that terrified her more than any threat could have. "I'm not alone," Maya lied, clutching the photograph tighter in her pocket. "My mom is just—" The words died in her throat, as they always did, because finishing that sentence meant facing a truth she had spent 7 years trying to escape. The man's eyes softened further, and she realized with growing alarm that he could see right through her carefully constructed defenses. Thomas Crow Feather had been walking these streets for 15 years, ever since the night his own world had collapsed in ways that still woke him screaming. He had perfected the art of being invisible, of moving through the city like a ghost who belonged nowhere and to no one. But something about this small girl huddled in the alley had stopped him cold, something that reached past his own carefully guarded pain and demanded action. What he saw in her eyes was a reflection of his own shattered soul, and for the first time in years he felt the dangerous stirring of hope. "What's your name?" Thomas asked, crouching down to her level, but keeping enough distance to avoid seeming threatening. He had learned long ago how to approach wounded creatures, both animal and human, and this child was as wounded as any he had ever encountered. "Maya," she whispered, then immediately regretted giving him even that small piece of herself. Names had power, and she had learned to guard hers carefully in a world where adults collected children's names like trading cards, passing them from one system to another until the names lost all meaning. Thomas nodded slowly, as if her name was something precious that deserved respect. "Maya, that's a beautiful name. It means illusion in Sanskrit, but it can also mean Great Mother Goddess." He paused, studying her face. "I'm Thomas Crow Feather. And I think maybe we both know what it's like to carry secrets that are too heavy for one person to hold alone. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, because they came too close to a truth she wasn't ready to face. She scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt, but Thomas remained perfectly still, making no move to follow or stop her. That stillness was what made her pause, because in her experience, adults who wanted to control her were always moving, always reaching, always trying to grab hold of something. This man simply waited, as if he had all the time in the world for her to decide what came next. "I don't have any secrets," Maya said. But even as the words left her mouth, her hand moved protectively over the photograph in her pocket. The gesture was small, but Thomas caught it, and something in his expression shifted. Not judgment, not pity, but something that looked like recognition. "We all have secrets, little sister," Thomas said quietly, using the Apache term of endearment without thinking. "Some of them we carry to protect ourselves, and some we carry to protect the people we love. But sometimes the heaviest secrets are the ones we think will hurt other people if we let them out into the light." Maya's breath caught in her throat, because somehow this stranger had put words to something she had never been able to express. The weight in her chest, the constant feeling of carrying something too big and too dangerous to share, the way she held herself separate from every person who had tried to get close over the years. How could he possibly understand something she had never told another living soul? "You don't know anything about me," Maya said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was still poised to run, but something kept her feet planted on the wet pavement. Maybe it was the way he had called her little sister, or maybe it was the pain she recognized in his eyes. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone in the world. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Maya understand she was about to hear something true and important. "When I was 25, I lost someone who meant more to me than my own life. For 20 years, I've been carrying the weight of that loss, telling myself that if I just kept moving, if I just stayed away from everyone and everything that might remind me of what I'd lost, the pain would eventually go away." He looked up at the narrow strip of sky visible between the alley walls, where a few stars managed to shine through the city's glow. "But pain doesn't work that way, does it? It doesn't get smaller when we try to hide from it. It just gets lonelier." Maya felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept locked away for so long that she had forgotten it was there. This man, this stranger, was talking about the exact thing she had never been able to name. The loneliness wasn't just about being physically alone. It was about carrying something so heavy and so sacred that sharing it felt impossible, even when keeping it secret was slowly killing her from the inside. "When I was 5, Maya whispered, the words coming out before she could stop them. "My mom died." The confession hung in the air between them like something alive and dangerous, and for a moment Maya was sure she had made a terrible mistake. She had never said those words out loud to another person, not in 7 years of foster homes and social workers and well-meaning adults who had tried to get her to talk about her feelings. Thomas felt the impact of her words like a physical blow to his chest. Not because the words themselves were shocking. He had guessed that death was part of her story from the moment he saw her, but because of the way she said them. Like a prayer, like a confession, like something holy and terrible that had been burning inside her for years. He recognized the tone because he had used it himself. In the rare moments when his own grief had broken through the walls he had built around it. What happened next would later seem impossible to both of them. But in that moment, it felt as natural as breathing. Thomas Crow Feather, who had spent 20 years avoiding emotional connection with any living soul, felt tears begin to slide down his weathered cheeks. Not just a few tears, but the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep that it seems to have no bottom. The kind of crying that happens when someone else's pain opens a door to your own that you thought you had sealed forever. Maya stared at him in shock, because in her experience, adults didn't cry. Not real crying, not the kind that shook their whole body and made them forget to maintain their composure. She had seen plenty of adults, Get emotional, but it was always controlled, always performed, always followed by reassurances that everything would be okay. This was different. This was raw and real and completely unguarded, and it made something inside her chest break open even wider. "I'm sorry," Thomas said through his tears. But he made no move to wipe them away or hide them from her. "I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry you've been carrying that alone for so long." The apology hit Maya harder than any comfort or advice ever had, because it wasn't trying to fix anything or make anything better. It was simply acknowledgement, pure and simple, of the fact that something terrible had happened to her and that she had been brave enough to survive it. No one had ever apologized to her for her mother's death, and she hadn't realized until this moment how much she had needed someone to acknowledge that it was something worth grieving. "What was her name?" Thomas asked gently, and Maya realized that no one had asked her that question either. People had asked about her mother's death, about her feelings, about her memories, but no one had ever asked about her mother as a person who had existed and mattered and been loved. "Sarah," Maya whispered, and speaking her mother's name aloud felt like opening a door she had kept locked for 7 years. Her name was Sarah, and she used to sing to me before bed. And she made the best pancakes in the world. And she painted her toenails bright purple because it made me laugh. The words came faster now, tumbling over each other as if they had been backed up behind a dam that had finally burst. She worked 2 jobs to take care of me, and she never missed a bedtime story. And she used to draw little hearts on my lunch napkins so I would know she was thinking about me during the day. And when she died, nobody ever talked about those things. They only talked about the cancer and the treatments and how brave she was. But they never talked about how she used to dance around the kitchen while she cooked dinner, or how she knew exactly what to say when I had nightmares. Thomas listened to every word, watching as Maya's face transformed from the carefully blank expression she had worn when he first saw her to something alive and bright and heartbroken and beautiful. This was what grief was supposed to look like, he realized. Not the careful, controlled sadness that people performed at funerals, but this wild, complicated mix of love and loss and desperate need to keep the dead person alive through memory and story. "She sounds like she was an amazing mother," Thomas said, and he meant it completely. "And it sounds like you were lucky to have her, even if it wasn't for long enough." Maya nodded, tears streaming down her face now too. But they felt different from the tears she had cried alone in foster bedrooms and group home bathrooms. These tears had a witness, someone who wasn't trying to stop them or fix them or explain them away. Thomas was simply letting her cry, the way her mother used to do when she was little and something had hurt her feelings. "The thing is," Maya said, wiping her nose on her sleeve, "I don't think I'm supposed to still be sad about it. It's been 7 years, and everyone always talks about moving on and healing and not living in the past. But I don't want to move on from her. She's the only family I ever had, and if I stop being sad about losing her, doesn't that mean I'm forgetting her?" The question hung between them like a bridge, and Thomas realized that Maya had just articulated something he had been struggling with for 20 years. The impossible choice between healing and loyalty, between moving forward and holding on, between accepting loss and honoring love. It was a question that had no easy answers, but maybe that was exactly why it was worth exploring together. "Can I tell you something, little sister?" Thomas asked, and Maya nodded. "I think maybe the people who talk about moving on don't understand that some kinds of love are meant to last forever. Your sadness isn't something that needs to be fixed or gotten over. It's proof that what you had with your mother was real and precious and worth protecting." Maya felt something settle in her chest, something that had been twisted and anxious for years. For the first time since her mother's death, someone was telling her that her grief was not a problem to be solved, but a connection to be honored. The relief was so intense that it made her dizzy, but even as part of her relaxed into this unexpected understanding, another part of her was preparing for the inevitable disappointment. Adults said things like this sometimes, especially in the beginning, but they always eventually got tired of dealing with a sad child. They always eventually wanted her to be easier, happier, less complicated. She had learned not to trust the gentle moments, because they made the abandonment hurt even worse when it came. As if he could read her thoughts, Thomas spoke again. "I know you probably don't have any reason to trust me, and I'm not going to make you any promises I can't keep. But I will tell you this. I understand what it's like to carry love for someone who isn't here anymore. And I understand what it's like to feel like you're the only one who remembers them the way they really were." Maya looked at him carefully, searching his face for signs that this was just another adult performance. But all she saw was exhaustion and sincerity, and something that looked like hope, tempered by years of disappointment. "Who did you lose?" she asked quietly. Thomas was quiet for so long that Maya thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My daughter. Her name was Anna, and she would have been 25 years old this month." The words hit the air between them like stones dropped into still water, and Maya felt the ripples of his grief wash over her. She had thought she understood pain, but there was something in Thomas's voice that spoke of a different kind of devastation entirely. The loss of a child was something she couldn't fully comprehend, but she could recognize the weight of it in the way his shoulders curved inward, as if he were trying to protect something that was already gone. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she processed Thomas's words about his daughter. She had expected him to talk about losing a parent or a spouse, but a child was something different entirely, something that made her own grief feel suddenly small and selfish. But before she could apologize or take back her question, Thomas continued speaking, and what he said next would shatter everything she thought she knew about loss and survival. "Anna was 5 when she died," Thomas said, his voice steady now, but carrying undertones that spoke of years spent practicing this control. "The same age you were when you lost your mother. She had leukemia, and we spent 2 years fighting it together, believing that love and determination and the best medical care money could buy would be enough to save her." He paused, looking directly at Maya with eyes that held 20 years of accumulated wisdom about the ways life could break a person. But sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes the strongest people still lose the battles that matter most. The parallel hit Maya like lightning, but instead of feeling coincidental, it felt like fate had orchestrated this meeting with surgical precision. Here was a man who understood not just the pain of losing someone, but the specific pain of losing someone at the exact age she had been when her world collapsed. The mathematical precision of their shared trauma felt too significant to be random, and Maya found herself wondering if her mother had somehow sent Thomas to find her on this particular night, when her loneliness had reached a breaking point. "That's why you stopped," Maya said, understanding flooding through her with startling clarity. "Or when you saw me, you saw her." It wasn't a question, because she could see the truth written in the way his jaw tightened and his hands clenched slightly at his sides. She had learned to read adults carefully over the years, looking for the tells that revealed what they really wanted from her. But Thomas's tells were different. They spoke of recognition rather than need, of shared pain rather than pity. "I saw both of you," Thomas admitted, and something in his honesty made Maya's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "I saw the little girl Anna was, and I saw the young woman you're becoming, despite everything you've survived. And I saw something else too." He hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue, then seemed to make a decision that would prove more significant than either of them could have imagined. "I saw someone who might understand what it's like to love someone so much that losing them changes the very structure of who you are." Maya felt tears starting again, but these were different from before. These weren't the desperate tears of isolation, but something warmer and more complex, something that felt almost like relief. For 7 years, She had carried the secret belief that her love for her mother was somehow excessive, that normal people didn't remain devastated by loss for so long. Every adult in her life had reinforced this belief with their gentle suggestions about moving forward and letting go. Their concern when she talked about missing her mother, their relief when she learned to hide her grief behind acceptable behaviors. "I dream about her every night," Maya whispered, sharing something she had never told another living soul. Not nightmares about her being sick or dying, but good dreams where she's still alive and we're doing normal things like grocery shopping or watching movies. "And when I wake up, I have to remember all over again that she's gone, and it hurts just as much as it did the first time." She looked up at Thomas with eyes that held a question she was afraid to ask directly. "Does that make me crazy?" Thomas felt his heart break open in ways he had forgotten were possible. Because Maya had just described his own experience with such perfect accuracy that he wondered if grief created its own language that only the truly bereaved could speak. "Oh, little sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that doesn't make you crazy. That makes you human. And it makes you someone who loves so deeply that even death can't completely sever the connection." He moved closer then, not enough to invade her space, but enough to make his presence feel more solid and real. "I dream about Anna too. Every single night for 20 years I dream about her. Sometimes she's still 5, and sometimes she's the age she would be now, and sometimes she's ageless, the way people are in dreams. And you know what I've learned from all those dreams?" Maya shook her head, hanging on his every word. "I've learned that the dreams aren't cruel tricks our minds play on us. They're gifts. They're the way love continues to exist, even when the person we love can't be with us physically anymore." Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her worldview, like a puzzle piece clicking into place after years of being forced into the wrong spot. The dreams that had felt like torture, the memories that had felt like obstacles to healing, the persistent ache of missing her mother. What if all of these things weren't signs of her failure to move on, but evidence of a love so powerful that it transcended death itself? "But how do you live with it?" Maya asked, and Thomas could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been fighting a war against her own heart for years. "How do you get up every day knowing that the most important person in your life is never coming back? How do you care about anything else when the thing you care about most is gone forever?" The questions hung in the cold air between them, and Thomas realized that Maya had just asked him something he had never been asked directly in 20 years of grief. Everyone had offered advice about healing and moving forward, but no one had ever acknowledged that the simple act of continuing to exist after losing someone you love completely was an act of heroism that deserved recognition and respect. "Some days you don't," Thomas said with brutal honesty. "Some days you just survive and that's enough. Some days you get up because your body does it automatically, and you go through the motions because that's what bodies do. And you don't think about tomorrow because thinking about an endless string of tomorrows without them feels impossible." He paused, watching Maya's face carefully. "But other days, something happens that reminds you why they would want you to keep going. A sunset they would have loved, a song they would have sung along to, a moment of kindness between strangers that they would have noticed and treasured." Maya nodded slowly, recognizing the truth of what he was saying. There had been moments over the years when she had felt her mother's presence so strongly that it seemed impossible she was really gone. Moments when she caught herself thinking, "Mom would love this," or "I can't wait to tell Mom about this," before remembering that those conversations would never happen again. She had always viewed these moments as painful reminders of her loss. But Thomas was suggesting they might be something else entirely. "There's something I need to tell you," Thomas said, his voice taking on a different quality that made Maya look at him more closely. "Something I've never told another person, not in 20 years. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "The night Anna died, she made me promise her something. She was so sick by then, so tired, but her mind was still clear. And she looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, 'Daddy, Promise me you won't stop taking care of people who need taking care of." Maya felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the cold, because there was something in the way Thomas told this story that made her believe she was hearing something sacred and true and previously unshared. "I didn't understand what she meant at the time," Thomas continued. "I thought maybe she was talking about her mother or our family, or maybe she was just confused because of the medication." But Anna was never confused about the things that mattered to her. Even at 5 years old, she had this way of seeing straight through to the heart of things. The parallel to Maya's age when her mother died wasn't lost on either of them, and Maya found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story in ways that felt both personal and universal. After she died, I spent years trying to figure out what she meant. I took care of her mother until grief drove us apart. I took care of our house and our belongings and all the practical things that death leaves behind. But none of it felt like what Anna had been asking me to do. Thomas looked directly at Maya then, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like recognition and purpose, and something that might have been destiny. It took me 15 years of wandering these streets, 15 years of running from connection and avoiding people who might need something from me, to understand what my daughter was really asking. She wasn't talking about taking care of people I already loved. She was talking about being open to loving new people, people who needed the kind of care that comes from understanding loss. Maya's heart began to beat faster, because she could sense that Thomas was building towards something significant, something that would change both of their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The air between them felt charged with possibility and fear and hope, all tangled together in a knot that neither of them knew how to untie. "I've been walking these streets for 20 years, Maya, telling myself I was grieving, telling myself I was honoring Anna's memory by staying broken. But tonight, when I saw you huddled in this alley, when I heard you whisper about losing your mother, I finally understood what Anna meant." His voice was growing stronger now, more certain, as if speaking these words out loud was making them more real. "She meant that love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes form. It becomes something we can offer to other people who need it." Maya felt tears streaming down her face again, but these tears were different from any she had ever cried before. They weren't tears of grief or loneliness or despair. They were tears of recognition, of coming home, of finding something she hadn't even known she was looking for. "Are you saying," she began, but couldn't finish the question because it seemed too big and too wonderful and too terrifying to put into words. "I'm saying that maybe we found each other for a reason," Thomas said gently. "I'm saying that maybe Anna and your mother somehow conspired to bring us together on this particular night, when we both needed to remember that we don't have to carry our grief alone. And I'm saying that if you're willing, if you trust me enough, maybe we could try to take care of each other the way families do." The word family hung in the air between them like something alive and dangerous and full of promise. Maya had not belonged to a family since she was 5 years old, and the idea of belonging to one again felt both impossible and inevitable. But even as part of her reached toward the possibility Thomas was offering, another part of her was terrified of wanting something so badly that losing it might destroy her completely. "I don't know how to be part of a family anymore," Maya admitted, her voice small but honest. "I've been in so many foster homes and group homes, and I always mess it up somehow. I get too attached or not attached enough, and people always end up disappointed in me or frustrated with me or both. What if I'm too broken to be the kind of family member you need?" Thomas smiled then, the first real smile Maya had seen from him all night, and it transformed his entire face from something weathered and sad to something warm and inviting and trustworthy. "Little sister," he said, "I've been homeless for 15 years. I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in longer than I can remember, and I cry every night for a daughter who's been gone for 20 years. If anyone's too broken for family, it's me. But maybe that's exactly why we need each other. Maybe families aren't supposed to be perfect people who have everything figured out. Maybe they're supposed to be imperfect people who choose to love each other anyway. Maya felt something inside her chest crack open completely then. Some final wall that had been holding her together through years of survival and self-protection. The possibility Thomas was offering wasn't just about having a place to sleep or someone to take care of her basic needs. It was about having someone who understood her grief, who wouldn't try to fix her or change her or make her into someone easier to love. It was about belonging to someone who needed her as much as she needed him. But what if we can't do it? Maya asked, voicing the fear that felt most dangerous. What if we try to be a family and it doesn't work and we end up hurting each other worse than we're already hurt? Thomas considered her question seriously, and Maya appreciated that he didn't try to offer false reassurances or empty promises. Then we'll figure it out as we go, he said finally. And if we fail, at least we'll fail together instead of alone. And if we succeed, he paused as if the possibility of success was almost too hopeful to contemplate. If we succeed, maybe we'll discover that love really is stronger than loss, and that families can be born from shared pain just as easily as they can be born from shared blood. Maya looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying, and made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives forever. "Okay," she said, the word barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute commitment. "Let's try." Thomas felt something he had not experienced in 20 years, the sensation of his heart opening to let another person in. It was terrifying and wonderful and felt like coming back to life after years of merely existing. "Okay," he said, echoing her word with his own promise. "Let's try." Neither of them knew it yet, but this decision would set in motion a series of events that would test every assumption they had made about loss and love and what it meant to heal. The journey ahead would be more difficult and more beautiful than either of them could imagine, and it would ultimately lead to a truth so profound that it would redefine everything they thought they knew about family, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways that love finds a way to continue even in the face of seemingly insurmountable loss. The motel room Thomas rented with the last of his emergency money was nothing like the foster homes Maya had lived in, but it felt more like home than anywhere she had been in 7 years. There was something about the way Thomas moved through the small space, checking the locks twice and positioning himself between Maya and the door while she slept, that told her she was being protected by someone who understood what it meant to lose everything that mattered. But what she discovered the next morning would challenge everything she thought. She knew about the man who had offered to become her family. Maya woke to the smell of coffee and something that reminded her powerfully of her mother's kitchen, though she couldn't immediately identify what it was. Thomas was sitting at the small table by the window, and spread before him were dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like letters written in a child's careful handwriting. The sight of so much preserved memory made Maya's chest tight with recognition, because she had her own small collection of her mother's things hidden in the lining of her jacket, items too precious to risk losing but too painful to look at regularly. "I'm sorry," Thomas said when he noticed her staring. "I should have warned you. Every morning for 20 years, I take everything out and look at it, just to make sure I haven't forgotten any details about her face, or her voice, or the things that made her laugh." He gestured to the photographs with a hand that shook slightly, and Maya realized that this morning ritual was both a source of comfort and a form of self-inflicted torture that Thomas couldn't seem to stop performing. Maya approached the table slowly, drawn by curiosity but cautious about intruding on something so obviously private and sacred. The photographs showed a beautiful little girl with Thomas's dark eyes and long black hair, but there was something else in Anna's face that made Maya's breath catch. It was a quality of openness, of joy, of absolute trust in the goodness of the world that Maya recognized from her own early photographs with her mother. It was the look of a child who had never doubted that she was completely and unconditionally loved. "She looks like you," Maya said softly, picking up a photograph that showed Anna and Thomas building what appeared to be an elaborate sandcastle. "But she also looks like she was the happiest kid in the world." Thomas smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried equal parts joy and heartbreak. She was happy. Even when she was sick, even during the worst parts of her treatment, she found ways to be happy. The nurses used to say she was their favorite patient because she made everyone else feel better just by being herself. He touched the edge of another photograph, one that showed Anna wearing a hospital gown but grinning widely as she held up a crayon drawing. This was 3 days before she died. She drew this picture of the two of us flying kites together, and she told me it was for when I felt sad and needed to remember that she was still with me, just in a different way. Maya felt tears starting again, but she also felt something else, something that surprised her with its intensity. Looking at these photographs, hearing Thomas talk about Anna's courage and kindness and capacity for joy, even in the face of terminal illness, Maya felt inspired rather than devastated. This little girl had faced the worst thing that could happen to a child and had somehow managed to remain loving and generous and concerned about other people's feelings right up until the end. It was a level of bravery that Maya wasn't sure she possessed. But it was also a model of how to love someone so completely that death couldn't diminish the power of that connection. "There's something else," Thomas said, his voice taking on a quality that made Maya look at him more carefully. "Something I haven't told you yet, something that might change how you feel about what we decided last night." He reached for a manila envelope that had been sitting apart from the other items, and Maya could see that his hands were trembling slightly as he opened it. "After Anna died, I couldn't stay in Phoenix. Too many memories, too many places where I expected to see her. So I took what little money we had left and I traveled, looking for somewhere that didn't hurt to wake up in." Maya sat down across from him, sensing that whatever Thomas was about to reveal would be significant not just to their relationship, but to her understanding of how their lives had become intertwined. The morning light streaming through the motel room window made the photographs on the table seem to glow, and Maya had the strange feeling that Anna was somehow present in the room with them, listening to her father's story and approving of the direction it was taking. "I ended up in a small town in New Mexico, working construction jobs and trying to figure out how to exist in a world that Anna wasn't part of anymore. And that's where I met your mother." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, so unexpected and impossible that for a moment she was sure she had misheard. Thomas continued speaking, but his voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "Her name was Sarah, and she was working as a waitress at the diner where I ate breakfast every morning. She had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, and she had this way of making everyone who came into that diner feel like they mattered." Maya's world tilted sideways as the implications of what Thomas was saying began to sink in. Her mother had never mentioned knowing a man named Thomas, had never talked about anyone she had met in New Mexico. But as Maya looked more closely at the photographs spread across the table, she began to notice things that made her heart race with possibility and terror and desperate hope, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't begin to untangle. "She talked about you constantly," Thomas continued, pulling out a photograph that made Maya gasp out loud. It was a picture of her mother, but her mother as Maya had never seen her, younger, healthier, laughing at something outside the frame of the photograph. She was sitting in what looked like a diner booth, and across from her, partially visible in the edge of the frame, was a man's hand holding a coffee cup. "She was so proud of you, so worried about giving you everything you needed as a single mother. She worked those 2 jobs you mentioned. But she also took art classes at night because she wanted to be able to teach you to paint when you got older. Maya's hand shook as she reached for the photograph, and when her fingers touched the glossy surface, she felt a connection to her mother that she hadn't experienced since the day she died. This was her mother as a whole person, not just as the sick woman Maya's last memories were dominated by, but as someone with dreams and friendships and a life that existed beyond the boundaries of their small apartment and Maya's 5-year-old perspective. "How is this possible?" Maya whispered, staring at the photograph as if it might reveal more secrets if she looked at it hard enough. "Why didn't she ever tell me about you? Why didn't you ever contact me after she died?" The questions hung in the air between them, and Maya could see that Thomas was struggling with how much truth he was ready to share. The revelation that he had known her mother was so enormous, so life-changing, that Maya felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to discover whether the fall would destroy her or set her free. "Your mother made me promise not to contact you," Thomas said finally, his voice heavy with 20 years of regret and second-guessing. "She was afraid that if something happened to her, if you ended up in the foster system, having a connection to someone like me would make things worse for you rather than better." He gestured to himself with a self-deprecating expression. A homeless Apache man with no fixed address and a history of depression wasn't exactly the kind of guardian figure social services would approve of. Maya felt anger flaring in her chest, bright and hot and more intense than anything she had felt in years. "So you just abandoned me? You knew I was out there. You knew I had lost the only family I had, and you chose to respect a promise to a dead woman over helping a child who needed help?" The words came out harder than she had intended, but Maya didn't try to take them back. This felt too important, too fundamental to their relationship, to soften with politeness or understanding. Thomas absorbed her anger without flinching, and Maya could see that her words were hitting him exactly where he was most vulnerable. "You're right to be angry," he said quietly, "and you're right that I abandoned you. I've spent 7 years telling myself that I was honoring your mother's wishes, but the truth is that I was scared. Scared of failing you the way I felt like I had failed Anna. Scared of loving someone else I might lose. Scared of discovering that Sarah had been wrong about me being someone worth knowing." The honesty of his response took some of the wind out of Maya's anger, but it didn't eliminate the sense of betrayal she felt. 7 years of foster homes, of feeling completely alone in the world, of believing that no one who had ever loved her mother was still alive to remember her or care about her well-being. 7 years, that might have been different if Thomas had found the courage to reach out, to at least let her know that she wasn't as abandoned as she felt. "What changed?" Maya asked, because despite her anger, she needed to understand what had brought him to that alley last night. What had made him finally break the promise he had made to her mother? "Why now? Why, after 7 years of staying away, did you suddenly decide to start looking for me?" Thomas reached into the manila envelope again and pulled out something that made Maya's heart stop completely. It was a letter written in her own 5-year-old handwriting, addressed to "Someone who misses my mummy too." Maya remembered writing it. Remembered the social worker who had suggested that writing letters to people who cared about her mother might help her process her grief. She had written dozens of letters in those first few months after her mother's death, but she had never sent any of them, had never even known who she might send them to. "Your mother gave this to me 3 days before she died," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said you had written it, but didn't have anyone to send it to. And she wanted me to have it, so I would understand that you were a child who needed people to love her, not just take care of her basic needs." He handed the letter to Maya, and she recognized her own careful 5-year-old printing, even as she struggled to remember what she had written. Maya opened the letter with trembling hands, and as she read the words she had written 7 years ago, she felt like she was meeting her younger self across an impossible distance of time and loss and survival. "Dear someone who misses my mommy too," the letter began. "My name is Maya, and my mommy is very sick. The doctors say she might go to heaven soon, and I'm scared about what will happen to me when she does. But my mommy says that love is stronger than anything, even death, and that if I love someone enough, they will always be part of my family, even if I can't see them anymore. I don't want to be alone when my mommy goes to heaven. If you miss her too, maybe we could be sad together sometimes, and maybe we could remember the good things about her together too. Maybe we could be a family that chooses each other instead of a family that just happens. Love, Maya. The letter ended with a drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, and Maya remembered spending hours on that drawing, trying to make it perfect, trying to capture something about hope and connection that she couldn't put into words. Reading it now, as a 12-year-old who had spent 7 years believing that no such person existed, Maya felt like she was receiving a message from the universe that some wishes are so powerful they can wait years to come true. She was right about you, Thomas said, watching Maya's face as she read her own words. You were a child who needed people to love you, not just take care of you. And she was right about something else too. He paused, as if gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. She was right that love is stronger than death, and that families can choose each other, instead of just happening by accident. Maya looked up from the letter to find Thomas watching her with an expression that contained 20 years of regret and hope and desperate longing for a second chance to do something right. I know I can't undo the 7 years I stayed away, he said. And I know that finding each other now doesn't erase all the pain you've suffered or all the ways I failed to be there when you needed someone. But Maya, if you're willing to forgive me, if you're willing to let me try to be the family your mother thought I could be for you, I promise you this, I will never walk away from you again. Maya felt something fundamental shifting inside her worldview, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves to create new continents of possibility. The anger was still there, and the sense of betrayal, and the fear that trusting Thomas might lead to more disappointment. But underneath all of that was something else, something that felt like coming home after a very long journey through foreign territory. I don't know how to forgive you yet, Maya said honestly, because even in this moment of recognition and connection, she couldn't pretend that 7 years of abandonment could be erased by one morning of explanations. But I want to learn how, and I want to learn how to be part of a family again, even if we're both going to mess it up sometimes. Thomas smiled then, and it was the first smile Maya had seen from him that contained more hope than sadness. Then we'll learn together, he said, and we'll mess it up together too, and then we'll figure out how to fix it together. Because that's what families do, little sister. They don't give up on each other, even when things get complicated. Maya nodded, feeling something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt since she was 5 years old, the sensation of belonging to someone who would fight for her, protect her, and love her even when she was difficult or sad or inconvenient. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to erase the pain they had both carried for so long. But it was a beginning, and for the first time in 7 years, Maya allowed herself to believe that beginnings were still possible, even for people who had lost everything that mattered most. There's one more thing, Thomas said, reaching for the last item in the manila envelope. Something your mother asked me to give you if we ever found each other again. He handed Maya a small wrapped package, and she could tell from the way he held it that it contained something precious and fragile and important. She made me promise to wait until you were old enough to understand what it meant, and I think maybe that time is now. Maya unwrapped the package carefully, and inside she found something that made her gasp out loud. Her mother's wedding ring. The one Maya had always assumed was buried with her, along with a note written in her mother's familiar handwriting. The note was brief, but contained words that would echo in Maya's heart. For the rest of her life, for Maya, when she finds her chosen family, love never ends, it just changes form. Wear this, and remember that you are loved across time and space, and even death itself. As Maya slipped the ring onto her finger, She felt her mother's presence so strongly that she turned around, expecting to see her standing in the motel room doorway. Instead, she saw Thomas watching her with tears streaming down his face, and she realized that he was feeling Sarah's presence too, that this moment was as much about his grief and love and connection to her mother as it was about Maya's inheritance. She knew, Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her with startling clarity. Somehow she knew that we would find each other eventually, and she planned for it. She wanted us to be a family. Thomas nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. After 20 years of carrying grief alone, after 7 years of believing he had failed Sarah by not taking care of Maya, he was finally beginning to understand that some promises are meant to be kept not through absence, but through presence. Not through protection, but through connection. Not through avoiding love, but through choosing it over and over again, even when it feels impossible. Yes, he finally managed to say. She wanted us to be a family, and maybe it took us 7 years to get here, but we made it. We found each other, and we're going to figure out how to do this together. Maya looked down at her mother's ring on her finger, then up at Thomas, then around the small motel room that somehow felt more like home than anywhere she had been since she was 5 years old. The journey ahead was still uncertain, still full of challenges and complications and opportunities for heartbreak. But for the first time since her mother died, Maya felt like she had a reason to believe that the future might contain something worth hoping for. 3 weeks into their fragile new family arrangement, Maya discovered that living with someone who understood grief didn't make the grief itself any easier to carry. If anything, having Thomas witness her worst moments made her more aware of how deep her wounds really went and how much work it would take to heal them. But what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late December would test whether their bond was strong enough to survive the kind of truth that changes everything about how you see the world. Maya had been having what she called one of those days, the kind where missing her mother felt like drowning in slow motion, where every breath required conscious effort, and where the weight of 7 years of accumulated loss seemed to press down on her chest until she could barely move. Thomas had learned to recognize these days and to give Maya the space she needed, while still making sure she knew he was there if she needed him. But today felt different, heavier somehow, and Thomas found himself watching Maya more closely than usual. They were sitting in the small apartment Thomas had managed to rent, with his first paycheck from the construction job he'd found, eating the grilled cheese sandwiches that had become their default comfort food, when Maya suddenly put down her sandwich and looked at Thomas with an expression that made his stomach clench with apprehension. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice carrying the kind of weight that meant whatever came next would be significant and probably painful. "Something about the night my mom died that I've never told anyone." Thomas set down his own sandwich and gave Maya his full attention, the way he had learned to do when she was ready to share something important. Over the past 3 weeks, Maya had begun to open up about her life in foster care, about the loneliness and fear and constant feeling of being temporary in other people's homes. But she had never talked in detail about her mother's actual death, and Thomas had been careful not to push her toward memories that might be too painful to revisit. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share," Thomas said gently. But Maya shook her head with determination that reminded him powerfully of both Sarah and Anna in their most stubborn moments. "I do have to tell you," Maya said, her voice gaining strength, "because it's about you, and it's about why my mom made you promise not to find me, and it's about something that happened that night that I think might change everything." She took a shaky breath, and Thomas could see that whatever she was about to say had been weighing on her for a very long time. "The night my mom died, she wasn't alone. I was there with her in the hospital room, and she was scared, Thomas. Really scared, in a way I had never seen her before." Thomas felt his heart begin to race, because he could sense that Maya was building towards something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about Sarah's death and his relationship with both of them. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for Maya's revelation. "She kept talking about you," Maya continued, her words coming faster now, as if she needed to get them all out before she lost her courage. "She kept saying your name and saying she was sorry and that she should have been braver, and that she should have told you the truth before it was too late." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I didn't understand what she meant then, because I was only 5 and I didn't even know who you were. But I remembered every word she said that night, because they were some of the last words she ever spoke." Thomas felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach, a premonition that whatever Maya was about to reveal would fundamentally alter his understanding of his relationship with Sarah and possibly with Maya herself. "What truth, little sister?" he asked, though part of him was terrified to hear the answer. Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something Thomas had never seen before, a small, worn envelope with his name written on it in Sarah's familiar handwriting. "She gave me this that night and made me promise to keep it safe until I was old enough to find you and give it to you myself. She said it contained something you deserved to know, something that would help you understand why she had made the choices she made." Thomas's hands shook as he took the envelope, and for a moment he was afraid to open it, afraid of what 20 years of wondering and regret and self-blame might have prevented him from seeing clearly. The envelope was sealed, and he could tell from its weight that it contained more than just a letter. When he finally opened it, the first thing he found was a photograph he had never seen before. Sarah, visibly pregnant, standing in front of what looked like a doctor's office. "Maya," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper, "when is your birthday?" "July 15th, Maya replied, and Thomas felt the world tilt sideways as the implications of what he was seeing began to crash over him in waves. He pulled out Sarah's letter with hands that could barely hold the paper steady, and as he read her words, 20 years of grief and confusion and self-recrimination began to rearrange themselves into a truth so profound and devastating that he couldn't immediately process it. "My dearest Thomas," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone, and Maya will be old enough to understand why I made the choices I made. What I'm about to tell you will hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But you deserve to know the truth about who Maya really is, and why I couldn't bear to burden you with that truth while I was dying." Thomas looked up at Maya, who was watching his face with an expression of terrified hope. And suddenly, her dark eyes and the shape of her face and the way she held herself when she was thinking took on entirely new significance. "Keep reading," Maya whispered, and Thomas could tell from her voice that she already knew what the letter was going to reveal. "Maya is your daughter, Thomas. She has been your daughter from the moment she was conceived, and she will be your daughter for the rest of her life, whether you choose to claim her or not. I know this comes as a shock, because I made the choice not to tell you when I discovered I was pregnant. I told myself I was protecting you, that you were still too broken from losing Anna to take on the responsibility of another child who might also be taken from you. But the truth is that I was protecting myself. I was afraid that if I told you about the baby, you would feel obligated to stay with me out of duty rather than love. And I couldn't bear the thought of raising a child with someone who was only there because he felt he had no choice." Thomas felt like he was drowning, like the air in the room had become too thick to breathe. Maya was his daughter. This child he had found in an alley, this girl he had offered to become family with, this young woman he had been learning to love as a chosen sister, was actually his biological child. The daughter Sarah had carried and raised and loved and lost. The daughter he had unknowingly abandoned for 7 years. The daughter who had been writing letters to someone who misses my mommy too, without knowing that someone was her own father. "I know you're angry with me right now," the letter continued, "and you have every right to be. I robbed you of 12 years with your daughter, and I robbed Maya of having her father in her life when she needed him most. I told myself I was being noble, but I was being a coward. I was so afraid of losing you that I chose to push you away instead, and that decision has haunted me every day since. Maya was crying now, quiet tears that she made no attempt to wipe away. "She told me the truth the night she died," she said softly. "She said you were my father, and that she had been too scared to tell you, and that she hoped someday I would be brave enough to find you and tell you myself. But I was 5, Thomas. I didn't understand what any of it meant, and after she died, everyone just assumed I was making up stories about having a father somewhere." Thomas looked at this child who was his child, this daughter he had unknowingly grieved for alongside Anna for 20 years. This piece of Sarah that had been walking through the world, carrying his DNA and his eyes, and his capacity for loving people so completely that losing them felt like death itself. The magnitude of what he had missed, what had been stolen from both of them by fear and miscommunication, and Sarah's well-intentioned but devastating decision to protect him from responsibility he would have embraced, hit him like a physical blow. "You knew," Thomas said, "and it wasn't a question. When you saw me in that alley, when you heard my name, you knew who I was." Maya nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I knew your name, and I remembered what my mom had told me about you losing a daughter named Anna. And when you said Anna was 5 when she died, the same age I was when my mom died, I knew it had to be you. But I didn't know how to tell you, and I was afraid that if you knew I was your real daughter instead of just someone you chose to help, it would change everything between us." Thomas felt his heart breaking open in ways he didn't know were possible, because Maya's fear made perfect sense and was also completely unnecessary and heartbreaking in its own right. She had been afraid that being his biological daughter would somehow make her less precious to him than she was as his chosen family, when the truth was that discovering she was his child made every moment they had shared take on layers of meaning and connection that left him speechless with gratitude and wonder. "Maya," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are my daughter. You have always been my daughter, from the moment you were conceived, from the moment Sarah first told me about the amazing little girl she was raising, from the moment I saw you in that alley and felt like I was looking at someone I had been searching for without knowing it. Finding out that we're connected by blood doesn't change how much I love you. It just explains why loving you felt so natural, so right. So much like coming home." Maya launched herself across the small table and into Thomas's arms. And for the first time in 20 years, Thomas held his child. Not a child he had chosen to love, not a child he was helping out of duty or kindness or memory of his own loss, but his own daughter, his own flesh and blood, his own legacy walking around in the world, carrying pieces of both him and Sarah forward into a future he had never dared to imagine. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Maya sobbed against his chest. "I was afraid you wouldn't want me if you knew the truth. Afraid you would think Mom was right to keep us apart." Thomas held her tighter, feeling 20 years of grief and regret and missed opportunities crystallize into a fierce determination to make sure Maya never doubted her worth or his love for her ever again. "Your mother was not right to keep us apart," he said firmly. "She was scared, and she made a mistake, and that mistake cost all of us 7 years we can never get back. But Maya, listen to me." He pulled back slightly so he could look into her eyes, those dark eyes that were so clearly his own. "There is nothing you could ever do, nothing you could ever be, nothing you could ever tell me that would make me not want you. You are my daughter and I am your father, and that is a fact that no amount of fear or miscommunication or lost time can ever change." Maya nodded, still crying but smiling now too, and Thomas realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, not the forgetting of loss, not the pretending that wounds had never been inflicted, but the slow, careful process of building something new and strong and beautiful on the foundation of what had been broken. They had both lost so much, but they had found each other, and they were family in every sense of the word that mattered. "There's something else in the envelope," Maya said softly, and Thomas realized he had been so overwhelmed by the revelation of Maya's parentage that he had forgotten to look for other contents. He reached into the envelope and pulled out a small key attached to a piece of paper with an address written in Sarah's handwriting. "She left you something," Maya explained. "She said it was something that belonged to both of you, something she had been saving in case you ever found each other again. She made me memorize the address, but I never knew what it was for until now." Thomas stared at the key and the address, feeling like Sarah was still orchestrating their lives from beyond the grave, still finding ways to bring them together and heal the wounds her fear had created. The address was across town, in a part of Phoenix Thomas had never been to, and he had no idea what they might find there. "Do you want to go see what it is?" Maya asked, and Thomas could hear in her voice that she was ready for whatever they might discover, that she trusted him enough now to face whatever secrets Sarah had left behind. "Together?" Thomas asked, and Maya smiled, the first completely unreserved smile he had seen from her since they met. "Together," she confirmed. "That's what families do, right? They face things together." Thomas stood up and held out his hand to his daughter, to this miracle of genetics and circumstance and love that had found its way back to him, despite every obstacle fear and grief had placed in their path. "Yes," he said, taking her hand and feeling the solid warmth of connection and belonging and home. "That's exactly what families do." As they left the apartment and headed toward whatever Sarah had left for them to find, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years, the sensation that the future held possibilities worth hoping for, that love really was stronger than loss, and that sometimes the most important truths take decades to reveal themselves, but are worth waiting for when they finally arrive. He didn't know what they would find at Sarah's address, but he knew they would find it together as father and daughter, as the family they had always been meant to be. The address Sarah had left them led to a small storage facility on the outskirts of Phoenix, the kind of place where people keep the pieces of their lives they can't bear to throw away, but don't have room to live with. As Thomas and Maya stood before Unit 47, key in hand, both of them felt the weight of 20 years of secrets about to be revealed. What they found inside would not only explain the choices Sarah had made, but would also give them a gift so profound that it would redefine their understanding of love, loss, and the mysterious ways that families find their way back to each other. Thomas's hands shook as he inserted the key into the lock, and Maya noticed that he had to try twice before he could make it turn. The metal door rolled up with a grinding sound that seemed too loud in the desert silence, and as fluorescent light spilled into the small space, both of them gasped at what Sarah had preserved for them. The storage unit was arranged like a shrine to their interrupted family, filled with items that told the story of a love, affair and a pregnancy and a child's early years that Thomas had never known existed. The first thing Maya saw was a rocking chair she remembered from their old apartment, the one where her mother had sung her to sleep every night until she was old enough to feel embarrassed by lullabies. But what made her heart stop was what was sitting in the chair, a teddy bear that was clearly meant to be hers, but that she had never seen before. It was worn soft from handling, dressed in a tiny Apache-style shirt, and pinned to its chest was a note in her mother's handwriting that said, "For Maya, from Daddy, with all my love." Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the chest as he realized what he was looking at. Sarah had bought this bear and dressed it and written that note, creating a tangible representation of the love he would have given Maya if he had known she existed. For 7 years, this bear had been waiting in storage, a father's love preserved in teddy bear form, ready to be claimed by the daughter who had never known it was there. "She bought it right after I was born," Maya whispered, moving toward the rocking chair like she was approaching something sacred. "She told me once that I had a special bear from someone who loved me very much." but that it was being kept safe until I was ready to understand what it meant. She picked up the bear with trembling hands, and Thomas saw that there were tear stains on the note pinned to its chest, evidence that Sarah had cried over this symbol of the connection she had denied both of them. But the teddy bear was only the beginning. As they moved deeper into the storage unit, they discovered that Sarah had documented Maya's entire childhood in duplicate, creating 2 sets of everything so that Thomas would be able to experience his daughter's growing up, even though he had missed it in real time. There were 2 photo albums, identical, except that one was labeled "For Maya to Remember" and the other was labeled "For Thomas to Know." There were 2 sets of Maya's artwork from preschool and kindergarten, 2 copies of every school picture, 2 sets of her first attempts at writing her name. Maya opened the photo album meant for Thomas and felt her breath catch as she saw her own life reflected back at her through the lens of a mother who had been thinking about her father with every milestone she recorded. Next to a picture of Maya's first day of kindergarten, Sarah had written, "She was so brave, just like you would have been proud to see." Next to a picture of Maya losing her first tooth, she had written, "She has your smile, Thomas. I see you in her face every single day." Thomas was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Sarah had done, the enormous effort she had put into preserving his connection to Maya, even while keeping them physically apart. It was an act of love so complex and contradictory that he couldn't decide whether he wanted to thank her or rage at her, or both at the same time. "There's more," Maya said softly, pointing to a corner of the storage unit where a small desk sat covered with what looked like letters. As they approached, Thomas realized that these were letters Sarah had written to him throughout Maya's childhood, letters she had never sent but had needed to write in order to process her feelings about the choice she had made. Thomas picked up the first letter, dated when Maya was 6 months old, and read words that made his heart break with their honesty and pain. "Dearest Thomas," it began. "Maya smiled for the first time today, and my first thought was that I wanted to call you and tell you about it. She has your eyes, and when she smiles I can see the man I fell in love with looking back at me from her tiny face. I know I made the right choice in not telling you about her, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. I love you both so much, and I'm sorry I don't know how to love you both at the same time." Maya was reading over his shoulder, and Thomas could feel her trembling as she discovered the depth of her mother's struggle with the choice she had made. These letters revealed a woman who had second-guessed herself constantly, who had missed Thomas desperately, who had wanted nothing more than to give Maya the father she deserved, but had been paralyzed by fear and grief and her own inability to believe that she deserved happiness. "Read this one," Maya said, pointing to a letter that was dated just months before Sarah's cancer diagnosis. Thomas read it aloud, his voice breaking on every word. "My darling Thomas, Maya asked me today why she doesn't have a daddy like the other kids at school, and I didn't know what to say. How do I tell a 5-year-old that her father exists but doesn't know about her because her mother was too scared to trust in love? How do I explain that I kept you away, not because you wouldn't have wanted her, but because I was terrified that you would want her out of obligation rather than joy?" The letter continued, and Thomas realized he was reading Sarah's growing awareness that she had made a terrible mistake, her desperate wish that she could find the courage to contact him before it was too late. "I think about calling you every day," she had written. "I think about packing up our little apartment and driving to wherever you are and showing up at your door with Maya and saying, 'Surprise, this is your daughter, and she's the most wonderful person in the world, and I'm so sorry I kept her from you.' But then I remember how broken you were when Anna died, and I convince myself that I'm protecting you from another potential loss. What I'm really doing is protecting myself from the possibility that you might not want us. And that's selfish and cowardly, and I know it." Maya was crying now too, not just for herself and the father she had been denied, but for her mother, who had clearly tortured herself with this decision for years. "She loved you so much," Maya whispered. "She wrote about you all the time, but she was so scared that you wouldn't want us." Thomas set down the letter and looked at his daughter. This beautiful young woman who carried his DNA and Sarah's heart, and her own incredible strength that had allowed her to survive 7 years of loss and abandonment, and still be capable of love and forgiveness and hope. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I would have wanted you from the moment I knew you existed. I would have loved you from the second I saw your face. Your mother was wrong about that, dead wrong, and her fear robbed all 3 of us of years we can never get back." Maya nodded, wiping her tears on her sleeve. "But we have now," she said, and Thomas marveled at her ability to find hope in the midst of heartbreak. "We have right now, and we have whatever comes next, and we have all of this." She gestured to the storage unit, full of preserved love and documented connection. "She kept you connected to me, even when she couldn't keep us together. That has to count for something." Thomas was about to respond when Maya gasped and pointed to something they had missed in their emotional exploration of the storage unit's contents. In the very back, almost hidden behind boxes of Maya's baby clothes, was an easel with a canvas on it covered by a cloth. Maya approached it slowly, and when she pulled away the cloth, both of them were stunned into silence by what Sarah had created. It was a painting, clearly Sarah's work, that showed Thomas and Maya together in a scene that had never happened, but that felt more real than any photograph could have been. In the painting, Thomas was pushing a slightly older version of Maya on a swing, both of them laughing, with Anna visible in the background watching over them with a smile. At the bottom of the canvas, Sarah had written, "The family we were meant to be." "She painted this while she was sick," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember her working on something in secret, something she said was for later, for when I was old enough to understand. I think she knew she was dying, and she wanted to leave us with a picture of what could have been." Thomas stared at the painting through his tears, overwhelmed by the beauty of Sarah's vision and the tragedy of how close they had come to actually living it. If Sarah had found the courage to tell him about Maya, if she had trusted in his capacity to love another child, if she hadn't been paralyzed by fear of loss, they could have been a family. Maya could have grown up with a father who adored her. Thomas could have had a daughter to help heal the wound Anna's death had left in his heart. And Sarah could have had the love and support she needed during her battle with cancer. "But you know what?" Maya said. And when Thomas looked at her, he saw something in her expression that reminded him powerfully of both Sarah and Anna in their moments of greatest wisdom. "I think maybe we needed to find each other the way we did. Maybe if we had been together from the beginning, we wouldn't appreciate how precious this is. Maybe we needed to lose each other first, so that finding each other again would feel like the miracle it is." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot of regret and anger that had been forming as he processed the magnitude of what they had all lost. Maya was right, he realized. Their story wasn't a tragedy about missed opportunities and wasted time. It was a love story about connection that transcended death and fear and human mistakes, about a family that had found its way back together despite every obstacle that had been placed in their path. "You're wise beyond your years, little sister," Thomas said, using the term that had taken on new meaning now that he knew she was actually his daughter. Or should I say my brilliant daughter? Maya smiled, the kind of smile that transforms a person's entire face and makes everything around them seem brighter. "I like it when you call me little sister too," she said. "It reminds me that we chose each other before we knew we were supposed to be together. That makes it even more special, doesn't it?" Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Their love for each other had been immediate and instinctive, not because they were biologically related, but because they recognized something essential in each other, something that spoke to shared loss and shared strength and shared capacity for hope in the face of overwhelming sadness. They spent the next several hours going through everything in the storage unit, reading Sarah's letters and looking at Maya's childhood preserved in duplicate, and marveling at the elaborate lengths to which love will go to preserve connection even when it can't maintain presence. By the time they finished, both of them felt like they had been given a gift beyond price, not just the knowledge of their relationship to each other, but the understanding that love really is stronger than death, that families really can choose each other across time and space, and even beyond the grave. "What do we do now?" Maya asked as they stood outside the storage unit, arms full of the treasures Sarah had left for them. The sun was setting over Phoenix, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded them both of the beauty that can emerge from endings. Thomas looked at his daughter, this miracle of genetics and circumstance and stubborn, persistent love, and felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since Anna died. "Now we go home," he said simply. "We go home and we hang your mother's painting where we can see it every day, and we start living the life she painted for us. Even if we're starting it 20 years later than we should have." Maya nodded, then surprised Thomas by taking his hand in the same unconscious way she used to take her mother's hand when she was small. "Do you think she knows?" Maya asked. "Do you think Mom knows that we found each other, that we're going to be okay?" Thomas squeezed Maya's hand and looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, thinking about Sarah and Anna and all the love that continues to exist even after the people we love are gone. "I think she knows," he said. "I think they both know. And I think they're proud of us for finding our way back to each other, for choosing love over fear, for becoming the family we were always meant to be." As they drove home through the Phoenix streets, Thomas and Maya talked about the future in ways neither of them had been able to imagine just hours before. They talked about Maya going back to school, about Thomas finding work that would allow him to be present in his daughter's life, about creating new traditions and new memories while honoring the love and loss that had brought them together. They talked about healing, not from their grief but with their grief, allowing their love for Sarah and Anna to become part of the foundation on which they would build their new life together when they reached their apartment and hung Sarah's painting on the wall where they could see it from anywhere in the small space. Both of them felt the presence of the women they had lost so strongly that it seemed impossible they weren't physically present in the room. But instead of feeling sad about their absence, Thomas and Maya felt grateful for their continued presence in the love that connected past and present and future in ways that transcended death itself. "When I was 5, my mom died," Maya said softly as they stood looking at the painting together. "But she also gave me something that night that I didn't understand until now. She gave me you, Dad. She gave me a father who would understand my grief because he carried his own, who would love me not in spite of my sadness, but because of the depth of feeling it represents. She gave me a family that was worth waiting 7 years to find." Thomas pulled Maya into his arms. This daughter who had been lost to him and found again. This child who had taught him that love really does find a way to survive even the most devastating losses. "And she gave me you," he whispered into her hair. "She gave me a second chance at being a father, a reason to believe that healing is possible, and proof that some promises are kept not through the letter of what we say we'll do, but through the spirit of what we mean to accomplish." As they held each other in front of Sarah's painting of the family they were meant to be, both Thomas and Maya felt something they hadn't experienced in years, the sensation of being exactly where they belonged, with exactly the person they were meant to be with, at exactly the right moment for their hearts to begin healing in earnest. They had lost so much, but they had found each other, and they had learned that sometimes the most precious gifts come disguised as the most devastating losses. Outside their window, Phoenix spread out under a canopy of stars that had witnessed countless stories of love and loss and redemption. But tonight, those stars were witnesses to something particularly beautiful, a father and daughter who had found their way back to each other across 20 years of separation, who had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and family over loneliness. They had learned that grief doesn't end when someone dies, but transforms into something that can connect us to each other in ways that transcend physical presence. They had discovered that the deepest wounds can become the source of the strongest connections, and that sometimes the longest journeys home are the ones that matter most. "I love you, Dad," Maya whispered, using the word she had never been able to say to anyone before. "I love you too, my daughter," Thomas replied, using words he had thought he would never have the chance to say again. And in that moment, surrounded by the preserved evidence of Sarah's love and the promise of Anna's continued presence in their lives, they began the next chapter of their story together, a story that would be written not in the shadow of their losses, but in the light of the love that had survived everything death and fear and human imperfection had thrown at it. They were family, they were home, and they were finally beautifully, completely whole.